Hello and welcome to another episode and series in our string of series called Artist Response to a Moment. My name is Joy Davis and I am the Adult and Community Programs Manager here at the Walters Art Museum, and I'm here with multimedia artist Edgar Reyes. Edgar has actually worked with us here at the Walters Art Museum for several years, collaborating annually with us on our Dia de los Muertos altar and a 2017 installation, Coyote, which we'll get into in a little bit. As a multimedia artist based in Baltimore, he creates work that is a reflection of his personal experience, as well as his experience as an undocumented youth in the United States. He nurtures the development of youth-driven, arts-based, and leadership initiatives that illustrate how art and design thinking can assist in self-expression and easing of cultural tensions. Love that. His practice highlights the beauty of being Mexican-American, yet questions his national and cultural traditions. Like other Chicano artists, he challenges social norms to bring forth awareness of what it means to be Latino. So I just want to give a big welcome to Edgar, and thank you for being on our program.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you to the Walters for inviting me to take part in this.
So my very first question is would you describe yourself as a multimedia artist, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I do describe myself as that. I think my work is very much a hybrid, much like my identity and much of the conversations that I engage in. What exactly does that mean? That means that I have this creative freedom to really go all over the place with my work and what exactly I do. So a lot of times I'll do stuff digitally, but at the end, most of it and its application will be in a very kind of tangible or very kind of traditional platform, either it be painting or pictures, but just kind of mixing traditional and digital art practices.
And we do have some examples of your work to show the audience. Wonderful. Did you want to maybe describe in a couple of sentences what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so what we're looking at the ofrenda that I created for the Walters, the first ofrenda from 2016. And the image on the left is actually a mural that's directly on a wall, and on top of that you have a digital print. And again, going back to the hybrid, or at least to the mixed media component, right? Mixing a digital collage with painting, and then vice versa. On the other side, you have a very kind of traditional ofrenda or an altar, where I'm kind of acting as kind of I guess most of my work also kind of references a lot of my family, like you said, right? It's very autobiographical. So for this first altar, I went through and I archived a lot of images from my family, and that's kind of what you see there. It's kind of an offering and an homage as well to those loved ones who have passed away, and also referencing not only my hybrid of my art practice, but also the hybrid nature of the celebration of Dia de los Muertos.
Love that. And as we move to the next slide, I'm curious, in addition to being an artist, you also are a teacher. And of course, these roles, I'm thinking they kind of meld together. So how do these kind of meld together and impact your making?
Yeah, so along with being a practicing artist, I'm also an educator. There's a lot of things that go into play when I say I'm an educator. I in a traditional sense, I do work in a private school right outside of DC, and then I'm also an adjunct professor at MICA. But along with that, working in a very kind of traditional format, I'm also a community artist. So what that means is that I work with a lot of youth, mainly Latinx youth and a lot of indigenous youth here in Maryland, right outside of College Park. And a lot of our work is dealing with these conversations about identity, how people perceive us, and then also our upbringings, or at least our shared upbringings. As you had mentioned before, I grew up here in the States, but I did grow up as an undocumented person. So that came with a lot of baggage, a lot of trying to figure out, where do I fit in this mold of the U.S. and how the U.S. perceives me and how I present myself. So a lot of my work is with these young people is kind of digging into that, and I see, my art practice as also being kind of an educational component, both for myself and also for the youth. Going to school here in the U.S., a lot of the things that I were taught were a lot of the things that many of us that went to school here were very Eurocentric, and a lot of stuff wasn't really told about my history and kind of where I come from. Not so much the Mexican part, but more so kind of the contributions of the fabric of the U.S. throughout, centuries of it being, who she is now, right? Who America is. So I think it's very important that, I take on this journey with the youth and kind of them teaching us and me also teaching them. So it's kind of a winded answer, but yeah.
I think that's great because it is a pretty big question, right? It's asking like, how do you merge these two different disciplines that you have, and how they're connected, but also how that is. There's a third component, which is how you meld your own personal experience into both. So I think that it requires a long answer for sure. My next question is switching gears a little bit. It's talking about your favorite medium to work in. What is that? What is your favorite medium to work in?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I think, going back to what I said previously, what I've seen is the fact that I'm kind of acting kind of like an archivist or a historian in essence, and I'm not sure, exactly if I fit that mold or that exact definition that people, might label themselves as that. But what I've discovered is that now that I'm able to actually go back and visit loved ones and just, self-educate myself in terms of visiting historical sites throughout Mexico and also here in the U.S., it's just the impact and the role that people like, not just like Mexican Americans, but also people of color who have had contributions through the U.S., but also just thinking about just the complex history of my family, both living in the U.S., but also crossing back and forth, and how fluid that might be at certain times, but also the impact that it's had, both generational and also in present day. So I think, my favorite thing is just kind of discovering these things and just having conversations with people. One of my favorite things that I came across recently, it was about 2 years ago. I was talking to this older gentleman. He was like maybe in his late 70s in Mexico, and I took a portrait of him, and we started talking. And he's like, I've also lived in the States, and I was like, oh, can you tell me some more? And it was just the weirdest coincidence. Then I was 27, and he's like, when I was your age, it's like about when I was 27, and I was like, whoa. And he was telling me about the fact that he was part of the Bracero program here in the U.S. If you're unfamiliar with the Bracero program, it was right after, I believe it was World War II or during World War II. There was a lot of Mexicans who were given a work visa, in essence, to come here and work. And he laid some of the railroads here on this coast, which is really interesting, just to be, in my art practice, taking pictures and just trying to engage and learn a little bit more of where I'm from. And it was, going back to your question, I think for me, my favorite medium, in essence, is just learning and being an archivist and documenting those stories through my work.
And it does seem to develop in your work. When you said fluidity, I really do see that in your work. And I do think that it's more expansive than just reflecting on that fluidity, both in your identity, the identities of those that you speak to, and just the more, if you want to call them traditional mediums.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fluidity that happens, and I think that this is a really Dos Mundos is a really good example of that. But even the work with the ofrendas, which we'll get into in just a moment, is an exceptional example.
Yeah, and kind of going back to that, now that we're on this piece, for me, I think really teaching students not just the history of us, right, and who we are, but also the history of art and the art medium, and the role that photography has played throughout history since its existence. How it's been a tool for colonizing, but also a tool to kind of control the perception that people have of others. So a lot of my work really reflects on that kind of white perspective, right? And viewing and kind of labeling people as others, and also the fact that it's really cool to come across like these two images, or at least my reference images. There were two photographs that I came across. Actually, I think somebody was throwing them out, or I can't remember exactly. Wow. And yeah, they were throwing them out. And then I asked them, I was like, it's like, what are you doing? They're like, yeah, we're just cleaning out the house. Like we're, selling stuff. This was in Mexico. And I was like, I'll take these from you. Like, I'll pay you. And I was like, I'll use them for something eventually for some art. They're like, yeah, they're, just family relics. And just realizing the power of images, right? And not really teaching, or at least elevating the fact that we have these beautiful things in our households that, serve as documents of the fact that we've existed.
Right.
And that we've always been here. And the fact that, how we look is beautiful. When you look at like the woman on the left, she does have like a bobbed haircut, right? But if you look at her, like the way she's dressed is very indigenous, kind of a mixture of kind of the European aesthetic, but also the European approach. The indigenous approach. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the image on the right, you look at like vaqueros and some of the horsemen during like northern Mexico, and also the history of that, the complexities of the fact that horses aren't originally from the U.S., but they're also or from the Americas, but they're seen as Southern culture and also Western culture, and
definitely Western an icon culture. Of that, right?
Yeah, so kind of referencing that, and I think photography plays a big role in understanding that. So I think for kind of going back to what you were saying, that's very important for me as an artist, is to reference that.
That's wonderful. I want to hop right into Coyote, because I think that was pretty pivotal, and I'm so glad that we provided that space for you to think outside of the altars that you are known for working with us for. And I wanted to ask you, when you created the installation in 2017, what was the concept for that particular exhibition?
Yeah, so I'd been asking the Walters to share a little bit more with me about their collection, their Mesoamerican collection, because it's very limited, especially when you walk through, if there isn't a special exhibit. And I was just curious, like, why and how does the Walter have these things? Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to just create conversation around it. And kind of what, after a while and just looking through their work, I got asked to create work in response to what I had discovered. And it was such a beautiful kind of organic experience where I was able to go into the archive, or to the Walters warehouse, and look at some of their work. Of course, I couldn't touch it. But it was beautiful just to see some of that work and just see the fact that, there were things that were 2,000 or 3,000 years old that, looked like me. Like I felt like this like emotional kind of connection to these pieces, where I was like, this is crazy. Like, especially during this time when people are saying like, I shouldn't be here, but there's this piece here that's been part of, quote unquote, the Americas, for thousands of years. And I'm having this kind of surreal connection with this emotional connection with this piece. So I think for me, what was important is to kind of reference those pieces and connect it back to, people who I know who are of mixed legal status, who are here in this country, but also people who have always legally been in this country, but look like these pieces. And that also, when I showed them images and emotionally connected to them as well, especially, where the pieces are from, are also pieces, or where they're from, or their family's from, or they're just like, yeah, it's like, that looks like me. Like, I want to be shown next to that piece. So I think that was so beautiful. And then, and Ellen, I think Ellen Hobler was such an amazing connection. She's a curator of the Mesoamerican collection at the Walters, and she's such an amazing, beautiful person who who did her residency in Mexico for her PhD in Mexico City. And she was a great connection. And I was able to actually, that summer of 2017, I was actually able to go and behind the scenes at the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City.
Wow.
And look again at some of these images there, not so much their artifacts, but more of their photographs. And it was really interesting, kind of the look firsthand some of the images that were taken of Mesoamerica, right, when the camera came into existence. And a lot of them was very interesting, the fact that it was like white men taking these pictures. And it was kind of reinforced the reason why I think photography and telling the history of photography is very important. A lot of it looked like it was kind of the very staged traditional picture or stereotypical pictures of Mexicans, right? Where, you know, somebody's holding a vase, or they just happen to be dressed in very folk wear, and a lot of it, even some of the pictures of the women were very problematic to me. I was like, this is just weird. The fact that this German white male guy is going around taking these pictures, so very romanticized, which kind of reinforced why I thought it was important for me to show at the Walters that year, and to show kind of pictures if somebody at that time that looked like me had a camera, how would they actually take the pictures and how would they represent themselves. So I thought that was really, really cool.
And I don't know how many ethnographic drawings or photography or paintings that we have, but that's a very long tradition of seeing the other in a very different way, just speaking to your work. And so I think and especially when it comes to the Americas and how to translate identity and the other at a time when, like you said, there was mostly white men, sometimes church heavy. So depending on the church entity would be involved in creating this sort of content. So it's really wonderful to hear your perspective and how you were translating that, not only for the contemporary, but also to kind of reassess those drawings, those photographs, and kind of like their importance, but also challenging their creation in the first place.
Yeah, and I remember I brought some of the models in, and the Walters was actually pretty flexible, because sometimes, you know, the hours of the Walters don't really work for a lot of people who I photographed, who might be working 9-to-5 jobs, or might be working night shifts even on Thursdays.
Right.
It was really cool just to get one of the families in there, and just to see their image on the wall, but then also juxtaposed with some of the museum's collection, and for them to be like, oh, like now I see your vision and why you were doing this. And they were so happy to, you know, be in the Walters, like being like kind of like this like private tour, but also to see themselves there. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, and kind of the way in which community art works very differently, and contemporary art to a certain extent operates very differently than traditional mediums and traditional art historical art objects, right? They have a different connotation. They are used in different ways, and therefore us being flexible as an institution is extremely important in making sure that we are conveying that message the way that you or the audience wants to interact with them. So I think that was a really important point to bring up. So my next question revolves around your, of course, collaboration with us on the Ofrendas. And I wanted you to give us a brief history of what the Ofrenda is for the Day of the Dead. You've done it with us for several years, and it's something that is connected to your own experience. So I just wanted you to kind of let us know what those are, and what maybe we could expect in the future at the Walters.
Yeah. So, you know, the way, whenever anybody asks me that, the way I kind of like to describe Dia de los Muertos is like, it's not Halloween. It has nothing really to do with Halloween. And but it does land around those dates. It's usually celebrated around October 31st and kind of for multiple days to its peak, November 1st and November 2nd. And I'll go back to why those November 1st and November 2nd. But originally, the celebration originated in Mexico, what is now Mexico, and throughout Central America and even South America. So it really isn't a Mexican holiday. And even then, labeling it as Mexican isn't really completely true. It's a hybrid. It's a melting pot of a holiday. It was, at least in my understanding, in Mexico, it's this Aztec and Spanish hybrid. But the Aztecs weren't the only ones that celebrated it throughout, at least even now, throughout Latin America, or at least throughout the Americas. You have people of Aztec descent. You also have Mayans. You have Toltecs that also celebrated this. And they all had all these, I mean, they're still living. So I got to remind people, like, these aren't people that existed back then. Like, still today, these are currently breathing and living people. And we still, and I say we we because I connect myself and I associate myself as an indigenous Mexican. We all kind of celebrate them at different times of the year, but because of the colonization of Mexico and a lot of the Americas, it kind of got pushed together and to kind of fit the mold of what the Spanish wanted, or at least the Catholic Church wanted. And it kind of fit All Saints Day and All Souls Days. And in essence, to go back to your question, Dia de los Muertos is just a celebration of the life of people who have passed away, and to really focus on the beauty of the fact that we got to share this time with them. And during this time, we can create this altar, this offering to bring their souls back from the dead, to at least live this moment with us. And I think it's really cool. And, I've never actually been able, at least from my memory, because I, migrated to the US, and I haven't been fortunate enough to go back during November. But I think it's really beautiful, the fact that, traditionally it wasn't really celebrated during November 1st and November 2nd. But now it kind of coincides when the monarch butterflies also come back and migrate to Mexico. Wow. So you have these really beautiful ofrendas and a lot of the graveyards covered in monarch butterflies. And a lot of the indigenous communities believe that those monarch butterflies are the souls of the loved ones. And kind of to talk a little bit more about what the ofrenda or the altar has, as you see in the PowerPoint slide, it usually has 4 elements. It usually has water element, it has the wind, it has the earth, and it has fire. 4 is a really important number, or at least within Mesoamerica, because it connects back to northeast, south, and west, kind of the cardinal points. But kind of bringing those elements back, and you'll see that a lot in even in the very kind of commercialized depictions of the ofrenda that you'll see maybe at Target or elsewhere, right? They kind of reference these things, referencing the water, referencing the wind, but more so referencing kind of the earth, right? Some of those elements that bring some of these loved ones back. But I think, in essence, to kind of reiterate, the celebration isn't really so much to highlight death, but more so celebrate the fact that we were able to live with these people, and the fact that we can bring their souls back and really celebrate in a very authentic way the fact that we can, at least in that moment, cherish that. Hopefully one day I'll be fortunate enough to be in Mexico during the November 1st and November 2nd. And why I keep saying that is because November 1st is actually to celebrate the lives of children, and then November 2nd is for adults. But I think it would be beautiful just to be there when all these monarch butterflies, who are doing this migration back and forth between the Mexico and through the U.S. up towards Canada, and just to see them like thousands of these to the point where they're almost like bringing down trees, I think would be gorgeous. I think it would be beautiful. I think it might be a one of those experiences, like I was saying earlier, where when I got to see these pieces at the Walters collection, I think it would be a very emotional, very emotional moment, I think, for me.
And I do want to shift gears just a little bit, but it's actually in line with this kind of emotional connection to work that is, in certain circumstances, at least in the physical space, new to you. Maybe in the spiritual sense, there is some connection that was already there. And that is in your role at collaborating with the Walters. How do you see your role in collaborating with the Walters? We talked a little bit about it, but I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah. I think it's a complex role. I think it's like it's a mutual relationship that the Walters and I have, where I'm able to learn through experiences, and they're also able to learn through my experiences of working with them. But I think in essence, it's like I'm able to bring and share ideas that maybe wouldn't be there, and really bring and open the space up to people who might feel uncomfortable with being in that space and might not feel like it's for them. Um, for years, even before I started working with the Walters has always been doing, at least from what I know, at least I think 5 years before, or maybe longer, they've had been doing the Dia de los Muertos celebration. And even now, they're one of the only institutions that do such a big celebration, right? There are other organizations throughout Baltimore, but I believe the Walters is the longest running. So I think it's making it accessible to people, and also kind of bridging that for them, to kind of bring them into the space and be like, hey, like your picture that I took of you, like it's in the museum, like it's a big deal, like you should bring more people. And I think it's really cool just to see, I took a picture of one person, but it's like they'll bring their friends or loved ones, everybody, scattered throughout the event, or as long as those 2 weeks or so that the piece is up. But I think it's also, to go back to my original answer, it's complex, right? Mm-hmm. Because as a contemporary artist, I believe my role is, with working with museums, is to kind of get them to question their role, and what purpose do they serve. And not to say that the Walters or other organizations are doing it, but I think working with contemporary artists, like we're going to have difficult questions, we're going to have difficult conversations, and we're going to learn throughout the process of working with each other, of things that I can do and can't do, or things that they're open to do. Like I would love to bring a very traditional altar, but I can't bring food, I can't bring stuff because of archiving reasons, and there's other things that play. But I think it's a beautiful relationship, and I think I'm excited to see where this blossoms, and as we continue to bring other artists into the conversation, and kind of opening the doors where I'm the first artist to do it, but how can we kind of bridge it open to bring in other artists, or for me to work with young people to maybe take ownership of it. And that's kind of the future of it, I believe, is where it becomes less of collaboration with me, but more so a collaboration with some of these community members that I'm bringing in, and to work and to really make it more sustainable, where if I happen to not be working and living in Baltimore, how can it actually continue? And I think that's really important. Is how can we kind of close that gap so the Walters or other organizations don't rely so much on me or other Latinx artists, but kind of make that connection with the community. I think is very vital. So kind of answers your question, right? I'm always really open. Sorry, I'm always really open to pushing the boundaries. So I think it would be really cool to really have more of their collection out during some of the celebrations, especially ones that relate back to the Dia de los Muertos.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think you itemized a few things that that we could use in thinking about working with the community in the future for sure. I wanted to back up just a little bit to talk about your favorite piece that you created for an ofrenda, and I just wanted to share that because I skipped right over that slide, and I want to do it due justice because it's so adorable.
So you were talking about the slide right before this one?
Yes, this particular one, your favorite piece that you created for an ofrenda, that you, if you could speak to that particular piece.
Yeah, so I remember when I first kind of stepped foot in the Walters and just walking through and just thinking about, like, you know, where do I see myself? Where do I connect? And it wasn't until like I kind of was almost leaving the Walters. And then I would happen to walk through, I forget the name of that gallery. What's the name of that gallery? I call it the Jumanji room, but it has all like taxidermy animals and
the
Chamber of Wonders.
The Hall of Wonders, yes, the Chamber of Wonders.
Chamber of Wonders, and walking through the Chamber of Wonders, and I was looking very mesmerized by a lot of the animals. A lot of my work also references plants and animals, tying it back to migration, and I was just kind of starstruck. I was like, whoa! I was like, what is this, piece doing here? And it was this the piece that we saw before, and it was just interesting just to see the fact that what in my mind would be on top of a pyramid, kind of this deity, right? This god, this Aztec god, and the fact that it was like behind this glass cabinet in the Walters, and that's kind of one of my favorites because it kind of got me to question and really connect with the Walters and really kind of hone in on that idea of what does it mean to have this there? How can we work together to kind of elevate it and to connect with people? And it was just really cool for me to put some of my personal stuff that's in my studio in front of it, kind of an offering, but also kind of a celebration of it, right? Like, hey, we're both in this city, and there's people who don't realize, like, potentially you could have been stolen and then bought and then ended up here. And same thing with me. My journey to the city has been, very complicated, and we're both here. Yeah. and just kind of owning that and celebrating that, and also kind of, a lot of my work, even that I show at the Walters, is referencing kind of the forced, but also the kind of this, I guess the forced, but also the, people that also embark on the journey of migration, right? So kind of referencing that, and that kind of talks a little bit about this piece. And this is my most favorite piece, I guess, of the entire collection. And I keep using the word emotional. I think this piece is kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of emotions, right? This piece is not only from the state that I'm from in Mexico, which is Jalisco, but it's also a mother and child, and kind of going back to the idea of pictures, right, and the significance of pictures, and then juxtaposed with that, at least right now on the screen, is a picture that I came across in my grandmother's dresser. She just throws a whole bunch of pictures, and every time I get a chance, I go through her dresser, and I'm always finding these gems of pictures. I remember coming across this picture that my mom sent her, and and it says, "With much love for my grandma, from my abuelita." And just seeing that juxtaposed with this other piece, I think it's beautiful. It just kind of adds so much layers to the fact that there's so many similar stories as mine of people who have left their country or have not voluntarily, just been forced to flee, and kind of seeing that with this piece where, why is it here? Why is it in Baltimore? And also the fact that it's thousands of years old. I think this piece was about 2,000 years old, and that it's also from where I'm from, and that it's a woman with a male child, and she's like very proud, and it's very similar to the way my mom's holding me, right? So yeah.
The juxtaposition is uncanny. It really
yeah, it blew me away when I like came across it again recently this week. Just thinking about my favorite pieces for the Walters, and it's again the emotional connection is a lot there. Yeah,
I love it. I wanted to go back to that, and of course, shifting gears once again to talk about how your collaboration with the Walters, how that has manifested in some of your other work. And we see an example here, and I wanted to know if you wanted to speak more to this very colorful work. You do work a lot in color, of course, but I wanted to know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah. So kind of going back to kind of my draw to the Chamber of Wonders, I'm a very curious person. Since I was little, I've always been like, I was a very annoying kid that always asked why. Like always asked why. So for me, I'm very interested in the history of color, and also like the role that garments and the color that garments wear, what role they played, not just in Mesoamerica, right, but also as countries and as people were traveling and colonizing, why certain places were getting colonized. Because of color as well sometimes, right?
Yep.
So for me is that connection, and really wanting to dive into that, but also a lot of the, I guess, artifacts, even the ones that the Walters have, they weren't stoned colored, not all of them. A lot of them had these really rich, beautiful colors, and a lot of them had this beautiful reds, beautiful blues, and for me, it's very important to kind of put all that together, kind of mash it up, and just kind of add those layers into my piece to think about, how were these indigenous communities, even now, right? A lot of these communities, how are they using color? How are they achieving this color? Either be through insects or through plants. And then also, how does that play into the world market even now? And then how does me making art about it add to that complexity of conversation?
Right.
So I think a lot of my work now is very vibrant, very kind of in your face in terms of colors. I work a lot digitally, so even then, like now it's very bright even on fabric. But when I'm working on the screen, it's because I'm working in an RGB or just a screen mode, right? So it's really, really bright. And eventually I think I really want to dive into maybe creating these colors in a more traditional forms. I've played around with it a bit, but I'm very interested in going back and to reflect on that. I've, as I mentioned before, I've been very fortunate to be able to travel back to Mexico, and it was really cool just to, at least last year when I was in Oaxaca, and just to see some of these Toltec weavers that are still living and breathing, right? Referencing what I said earlier, right? And, when we say Mesoamerica, it's still happening a lot in terms of the traditions and a lot of these indigenous traditions, and just to see how they're still weaving and how they're able to kind of mix what the Spanish brought, but also keep in tune with what some of their traditions for thousands of years have been. And I think my work kind of referenced that in terms, not just the color, but even now, some of the applications of it. I didn't make these in a traditional format. I sent them out to get fabricated and printed. But I think that also adds to the whole complexity of what my piece is talking about, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of these industries, a lot of these printing presses and et cetera, right, are taking jobs from some of these indigenous communities. And, what role do I play in that by sending my work out, but also how can that also add to the layers of the meaning of the piece? Referencing some of those older sacred pieces, but then also some of these stereotypical staged pictures, right? That, when I say Mexico, that might be what people associate, but also the beauty of that as well, right? Because a lot of my family, even to this day, like they're campesinos, not all of them, but they work the land and that's how they make their life. But, they do dress like that, but not in a very staged way, right?
Right.
Really diving into that through color.
I love that. And I really do appreciate two things about what you just said. Everything that you said, but two key points. And one of that was calling out your own practice in that your responsibility in getting it sent off for printing versus contacting an individual who is in that community, because I think oftentimes that's challenging for people to kind of confront, but you do it so fluidly in how you speak. It's just a part of who you are. So I wanted to call that to the fore. And then secondly, it's also thinking about these traditional ways we visualize culture and how sometimes it's not necessarily so far off. It's just the way in which it's depicted, right? Like that staged component. So I just wanted to bring those up because I noticed those are two very, very poignant points out of what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it took me a while. I think my practice is still developing. The way I talk about it, I think that's very important. And that's what kind of the you got to be able to talk about your work, because sometimes, at least what I've noticed, not so much, I guess I could say it, like here in Baltimore, like it's really hard to have people talk about my work because they don't have the experiences or don't have the language to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So thanks to a lot of my friends, one of them who was here in Baltimore but now lives in Texas, Juan Ortiz, and one of my mentors and one of many who have just kind of taught me, like, Edgar, you have to be able to talk about your work. You got to learn about your history. And then you also have to be able to, use language and use things that will elevate and not so much have people take you seriously, because I think language is such a coded thing, but so much to like, how can I talk about my work? And I think it's very important because, going back to what I said originally, like there isn't that many people that, if it wasn't for me telling them about my piece, that they could just see it and talk about it and talk about these layers and talk about, the significance and why I chose to do this, why I chose to do that. And so I think it's important, and it sucks, but it also kind of adds to the reasoning why I love to just learn, just always learn, keep learning about the history and kind of the role in terms of politics that play into this, and understanding the reasoning, why my family for generations have crossed back and forth between the US and Mexico, and the fact that there are even people within my own family who even grew up not needing papers, right? Like it's just an obscure thing to have to show papers where, there's this arbitrary line of what is the US and what is Mexico.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, I just wanted to bring that up, but I think you said it sucks, but I think that's a part of growing as human beings, to kind of uplift ourselves and empower our own personhood, as opposed, and also either our own people or those around us, is to kind of be armed with that language to teach, learn, and grow from that.
Yeah.
So I think that's great what you said. I wanted to wrap up with this question about what you are currently working on. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a revolution right now. And so there is sometimes we get inspired in those moments, and sometimes we just want to be quiet and relax. And so I just wanted to ask you what you're currently working on, and if these multiple moments and I wouldn't even say phenomena, but just these like catalyst moments are affecting your practice right now.
Yeah, I'm an educator, so it was kind of a weird time to make art because I was always on Zoom meetings or teaching students. But I think eventually, once I had time, once the dust kind of settled, and I was actually able to just use this time to go through some of the images that I've collected through my travels or through going through my grandmother's dresser or drawer of pictures, and also through some of the pictures that I've taken, and just really taking this time to sit back and just reflect. I think it's been really important. Uh, my girlfriend and I have been going on really long walks, and that's really important for us, not just like get out of each other's hair, but also to be somewhat outside. But I've taken that as time to kind of reflect and just see and question, people putting these expectations on artists, but also thinking about like, what were people doing before, right? In terms of, this isn't the first time or the last time that we're going to deal with something with this situation.
Right.
And just for me, I think it's really important just to think about how it's also impacting the people that we're not hearing from. And a lot of times those are those indigenous communities or those communities of color. And for me, I think it's important just to reflect and just to think like, a couple hundred years ago, when the Spanish and the English came through and Portuguese and everybody else from Europe came through, and also African slaves, there was diseases that came and impacted and wiped out large numbers of communities, and a lot of them, survived and are still living and breathing. But how do they sustain their culture? How do they sustain their practice? And I think through art played such a big role. So I think to kind of go back to your question, what am I working on, and is reflecting. I think that's really important, and just to go back and have the time to just sit and not make anything, but also make something. So I came across this picture that I bought, and I actually bought this. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I think this was a negative. So again, I love buying really random old pictures. My mom thinks it's really weird. She's like, they're probably dead. I'm like, yeah. I was like, that's so cool. Like, that's also kind of the complexity of photographs, because a lot of people of color or marginalized communities could only pay for their picture to be taken because they were dead. Like somebody wanted their picture. But this is a picture, and I believe, I'm trying to remember. Yep. So this picture was actually some guy from the US, some white guy. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember his name. He had I think his name was like John or something, and it had like a little note. And he was traveling through, I think this was Antigua, so I think Guatemala, I think. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, kind of this staged, somewhat perception of what the indigenous community might look like, and kind of owning it at the same time, but also kind of playing around with that. So this image had been sitting in my studio for a while. I wasn't sure what I was going to use it for, and then I got asked to make a print for the Baltimore Art Box for the Creative Alliance, and this was for them, and this was really cool just to be able to finally, I'm like, okay, like reflect on my indigenous connection, right? But also this, like, going back to what we were saying earlier, this, like, this guy that went and was privileged enough to go to this part of the world, but still got this like very staged picture, but kind of own it too for me, and be like, okay, this woman is powerful. This woman is strong. She's a weaver. She's in our practice. I was able to sustain, colonization, and it's still going to continue even, past this, COVID-19, like it's still going to exist. It's still going to be living and breathing. So kind of paying an homage to that. And also, what I've noticed with a lot of my work, it goes back to kind of honoring women and honoring, the fact that I was raised by a single mother, and at least for a lot of when I was younger. Right. But kind of reflecting on that and really uplifting the power, the beauty, and also kind of the struggle of having that burden. I can only imagine. So kind of that's where I'm at in terms of my practice, is just looking through my archives and seeing how that reflects with present day, and finally having the time to sit and think. I think it's really important.
I think that's a great way to end, is how a lot of people, I think, will commiserate with that and have run to reflection versus like actively just doing a lot. I think is a sentiment I've heard a lot, not just through this series, but also in talking with friends and colleagues at the Walters, is finding time for that reflection. I don't see that we have any questions, so I just want to thank Edgar for being here. We will, of course, continue our friendship, our collaboration with you, and thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing so much of your work today. I also want to thank our digital team, including Sydney, for helping us make this possible and getting us into the groove digitally for all of our program. And lastly, I want to thank you who were visiting and watching this. Thank you so much. Please feel free to share it with friends, and we'll see you in the next program. Thanks again, Edgar. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.